I've had a knitter come and say to me that they tried to knit a two-color brioche shawl, worked flat, back and forth in rows, and it was a disaster. And they decided they hated brioche. They came to me and they asked, is there anything I can do to make brioche easier? And the answer is yes, there absolutely is. The biggest problem is if you start with two color and something like a shawl that's worked back and forth in rows, and it's probably in a very fine yarn, the likelihood is you are jumping way in at the end of the brioche spectrum. If you've never done brioche before, it means that you have skipped all of those starting steps that can ease you gently into brioche knitting, understanding how it fits together, understanding how the stitches relate to one another, and letting you gain confidence slowly. So in this video, we're going to take a look at that learning curve, and I'm going to give you stepping stones that you can take if you've either never done brioche before, or perhaps you've jumped in and it was a complete disaster for you. So to begin with, there are different kinds of brioche stitches. There's brioche where you're doing one color back and forth flat. That's going to use the brioche knit stitch and the slip-on yarn over. Then you've got one color brioche that is knit in the round. And for that, you're going to have slip-on yarn overs and brioche knit and brioche purl. So there's going to be a new stitch introduced. Now for two color, when you join that in the round, it's very straightforward because one stitch is always going to be brioche knit, or rather one color. The other color is always going to be brioche purl. So it's almost color coded for you. And I actually think that the most difficult one is going to be at the very end where you are looking at two color brioche worked flat, because it's going to be a lot more complex. So there are the different kind of stitches. So let's go back to where you'd begin. My suggestion would to be get started with just a swatch with one color, using a slightly heavier yarn so it's easy to see your stitches, and just working brioche back and forth in rows. So what that's going to do for you is it's going to teach you how you can work the edge stitches, what the brioche knit stitch looks like, and what the brioche purl stitch looks like. And you start understanding the fact that you're basically working two sets of fabric, one on one side and one on the other with that. And the construction and the rhythm of the knitting of brioche will start getting much more comfortable, and your finger will understand where it needs to go when it's doing that slip-on yarn over. So start with that. And when those brioche knitting in one color, flat in rows, feels comfortable, then you can move on a little bit in complexity. So the next step I would suggest would be an accessory that has got, ideally it's one color, doesn't have an awful lot going on, but perhaps introduces some increases and decreases where you start adding some real interest into brioche. Once you understand the brioche basic stitch, then the increases and decreases should be quite manageable. I have a Knit Basics course where you'll find all how to do the basic knit stitches, brioche knit stitches, slip-on yarn overs, and increases and decreases. It uses the Melandro scarf pattern, but you can also use it just as a swatch mechanism where if you just want to try those increases and decreases. So once you've got those masters, then you can actually start moving into some of the other variations. I will often actually recommend that the next step is going to be two color brioche in the round. And the reason for that is when you're working two color in the round, the columns that look like knit stitches are always going to be knit, and they'll be in a single color. And then the ones in between that look like a purl stitch will be in the second color, and they'll always be brioche purl. So as I was saying earlier, it's effectively color coded, and it's a lovely way to learn what the stitches look like, which one you're going to brioche knit, which one you're going to brioche purl. Then at that point, you can jump into the final stage where you may perhaps have tried starting before, which is a two color shawl. So you can have two colors worked flat in rows. And when you're doing two colors in rows, what you're going to be doing is working each row twice. So the first time you work across it with the main color for that side. So say it's color A. So all of your color A stitches are going to be brioche knit, and the other color will be just slip-on yarn over. You reach the end, slide it back over, and then you're going to work the second color, your color B, and those are going to be brioche pearl, and the other ones will be slip one yarn over. So you'd have worked 2 rows with that, one with color A, one with color B. Color A is brioche knit, color B is brioche pearl. Then you turn it around and you're going to invert. You do color A, and this time your color A is going to be your brioche pearl. Slip back to the start, color B is going to be brioche knit. So that way every side has got a knit and a pearl with each color, but you're sliding back and forth. So you can see how that is definitely a more complex type of brioche, but if you understand all of the other steps that come before that, then that will start to make sense, because you'll see how the stitch is constructed. You won't accidentally be putting pearls in where they're meant to be knit, and you'll have a much more intuitive understanding of the brioche. So that's kind of a list of the different types of brioche construction. But going back to the original one, where perhaps you were doing that 2-color shawl, it may not just be the technique, it might be also the material you're using, the yarn you're using. Because if you're doing a shawl, you're usually going to have a very fine yarn knit at a loose gauge. And you may even be doing something that's low contrast to give a really interesting color combination. But if you are learning brioche, you first of all want a slightly heavier yarn so it's much easier to see your stitches. And secondly, you want a fairly good contrast. So you can see here, there's 2 different colors done here. The more contrast they have, the more it's going to help you with color coding your knitting, so you're not accidentally going to brioche knit something that's meant to be brioche pearled. And I find that if you're doing something that perhaps one is a solid color and the second one is a semi-solid, there are sections where the 2 colors almost merge, which will look lovely in your knitting, but for learning brioche, it's definitely going to cause a bit of a problem. So that's the first couple of sections of brioche. Obviously, one thing that people frequently run into problems with is how you fix mistakes in brioche, because it can be really daunting in brioche if you run into a mistake figuring out how to fix it. But we do have a couple of videos for common mistakes. First one that happens very often is you missed a yarn over. So we show you how you can lift a yarn over when you're working the next row and put it back in. And the other one is when you slip a stitch, where you slip it with the yarn on the wrong side. So your strand is suddenly on the wrong side of your work. So how you can go back down and drop the stitch and correct that as you're going. So you can find the videos, links down below, to be able to fix those too. And then, of course, the other thing that is eternally helpful for any kind of knitting is lifelines. We've got a video that we link also down below, so that if you're knitting something with a stitch pattern in brioche, when you finish your repeat, put a lifeline in so that if you mess up the next one, you can pull your needles out and drop right back down to that lifeline. So it means that you can learn with confidence and not have to worry about having to rip all the way back down. So now that you know how to fix them, the next thing is to figure out what you're going to knit. And we would suggest taking a look at your Master Your Stitch class lessons that we've got here on YouTube, where we take a look at accessory patterns that you can learn brioche with, and also some garment patterns. So again, links down below where you can find all of that information. So hopefully you will have learned an awful lot on how to work brioche, and if you've got any other questions, just drop them down below.